Partners, this week my researcher and writer, Dennis Daly, brings us information about a woman who can best be described as a modern-day patriot. Her name was Beate Gordon. Beate is a kind of difficult name to say. Her friends called her Betty. Well, I can understand that, so that's what I'm going to do as well. Even though she grew up to be an American who had the guts to change the lives of millions just after the Second World War, like so many good Americans, she was born in another country. Betty Gordon was born in 1923, the year I was born, in Austria. Both of her parents were musicians. Her dad moved to Austria during the early Hitler years. You see, he was Jewish and saw the handwriting on the wall. After some time in Austria, starting a family and building his musical reputation, Betty's dad was offered a job as a professor at a top music college in Japan, where he moved his family. Betty was still very young and learned to speak Japanese fluently. And because of her knowledge of the Japanese, it opened an important door years down the road. Eventually, the family moved to the United States, where Betty became a director of the Japanese Society of the United States. During this time, she also made a name for herself in the world of performing arts. Okay, Jimmy, how can a woman who was born in Austria, lived in Japan, and was a successful member of the fine arts community in the United States end up changing the lives of millions of people? Oh, shut up. Man, you're screaming out, Weldon. Just take it easy. I'm glad you asked that, though. You see, Betty Gordon was in the right place at the right time. So, as I love to do in these reports, let's move ahead in time to the Second World War. The war had taken its toll all around the world. In May of 1945, Hitler's Germany fell apart. That's the one I was in with Patton's 3rd Army Combat Engineers. The emphasis was now on ending the war against Japan. When the Japanese finally surrendered, it was General Douglas MacArthur who accepted the signatures of surrender on the ship. I remember seeing that so well in the news. For some time after the war, MacArthur stayed in Tokyo. He was certainly the right man for the job of helping to rebuild Japan. You see, General Douglas MacArthur was an expert on Asia. He had helped the Philippines organize its own army. No American military man had spent more time in Asia. So when World War II ended, it was Douglas MacArthur who was chosen to be this country's representative in Japan. And partners, here is the important thing. Douglas MacArthur understood the way the Japanese thought. He was responsible for making sure that Japan kept his emperor and much of its traditions. To do this, he hired a large number of people who were fluent in Japanese and knew about Japanese society. Among these was Beate Gordon. Yes, Betty. She arrived in Japan on Christmas Eve, 1945. Records show that Beate, or Betty, was the first woman from the United States to be permitted to go to Japan at the end of the war. Jimmy, what? Please tie up some loose ends here. Where's this going? Well, thank you very much for asking. It is the role that Betty Gordon played in General Douglas MacArthur's office that made her a modern-day patriot. You see, MacArthur was determined that Japan would always have its traditions, but he wanted the nation to have its own democratic constitution. One day, so the story goes, MacArthur was talking with one of his assistants, Betty Gordon. Yes. He asked Miss Gordon what she thought the role of women in Japan should be. After all, traditionally in Japan, women didn't have many rights. Suddenly, MacArthur had an idea. He would give Miss Gordon the chance to write the entire section of the new Japanese Constitution dealing with human rights and women's rights in particular. Well, at first, Betty told her boss that she didn't think she was good enough to carry out the task, but General MacArthur felt otherwise. So Betty Gordon set to work. When she had finished, she had crafted a document that even Thomas Jefferson would have been proud of. Even though the Japanese government made changes in some of the suggested wording of her way she wrote it for the new post-war Constitution, the section that Betty Gordon wrote was left just exactly as she had written it. In part, she wrote, quote, "All of the people are equal under the law, and there shall be no discrimination in political, economic, or social relations because of race, creed, sex, social status, or family origin," end quote. But that's not all she wrote. Here she goes again, quote, "Marriage shall be based only on the mutual consent of both sexes, and it shall be maintained through mutual cooperation with the equal rights of husband and wife as a basis," end quote. Golly. Betty Gordon also added that the property of a marriage shall belong to both the husband and wife. Partners, with those words, she brought marriage out of the Middle Ages and into modern times in the country of Japan. Today, women from all around Asia stop to see her statue in Tokyo. By the way, after changing the lives of millions of women overseas, she came back to the United States. During the final decades of her life, she raised millions of dollars for music education and sponsored grants for students in poor neighborhoods to learn about fine music. Beate Gordon died only 5 years ago. She was 89 at the time. Although she was thought to be the last living member of General MacArthur's special team in Tokyo, her death went unnoticed in a lot of places. But in Japan, millions of women took time out to pay special honor to her. After all, the child of Ukrainian Jews who was born in Austria and grew up in Japan had given them a precious gift: freedom. Freedom. Beate Gordon was a true modern-day American patriot. Beate Gordon, the American woman who is worshipped in Japan. Okay, partners, you know the drill. Look up there and see those 3 boxes. The one with the farthest to right has the red X in it. Click that red X, nothing else. You'll return to my report page where you were and finish reading it. The American woman who is worshipped in Japan. Hey, Dinkster, I love you. Thanks so much for keeping us with special people outstanding, just like Beate Gordon. I love you guys. Go get 'em, Tigers.